Welcome back, everybody, to me being grumpy about the Wheel of Time. And we're continuing to go through A Crown of Swords. Chapters, what's that, like 14 to 23? Something like that, I think. And, still not good, I think. So yeah, let's get this started, shall we? Cheers. All right, so where are we going with this? Quick overview, it's mostly Matt and stuff, Matt and girls in Tanchico. There's a little bit of Rand thrown in, and that's about it. You know, a bit of jumping around, talking, seeing what the evil people are up to. And there's not that much new stuff to be annoyed about that I haven't spoken about before, so I guess we'll mostly look at why the writing sucks today, shall we? Alright. So, let's start with continue with where we stopped, which is in Ebudar. And we have a bunch of things going down. One of them is, Matt finding out that there are dark friends hanging out with, what's the name? I keep forgetting his name. Anyway, one of the Inquisitors, the guy we know as the man called Bors, or calls himself Bors from the prologue of The Great Hunt. That dude. Chief Inquisitor, second in command Inquisitor of those white cloaks who, suck. But yeah, he finds that out through just, long stuff that doesn't go anywhere, but, is supposed to probably tell us about the country, the city, culture and whatnot. It just doesn't really work well, but, that's something we've gotten used to. So yeah, we find out that there's obviously more stuff going down there. But, yeah, well. Now, why is that interesting? I think it's interesting in some regard, because it shows how far these, the pace has slowed down in these books compared to, like, the earlier bits. Because what happens in, like, that chapter, and it's, all in all, it's more like 2 chapters, almost 3. It's like basically Matt goes to like a horse race where Oliver, the boy, is horse racing and winning, and it's not exactly, And then he sees someone who he sort of recognizes and then follows them for a while and goes to this place and buys a signet ring with foxes on it because, of course, dice and stuff, right? And, yeah, sorry, it seems my neighbors have decided to actually hammer nails into the wall. Again, they're doing this like every day these days. Who knows? So I hope it's not going to be too annoying. Anyway, so yeah, he hears his dice in his head again. And we'll talk about that in a bit. So he walks around, follows that woman that he recognizes from Eye of the World because she tried to stab Rand, and then I think they locked her up in like the tack room of the stable. I think that's the one. Yeah. Anyway, so and then he sees that thing, and then like someone pops up next to him. Is like, oh, this is where, and I forgot the name of the guy. Jacob Carradine. That's the dude. That's who is in there. And so, oh shit. And then he goes back to warn people about it. And you know what? That takes a long ass time in writing to talk about that because we get we get drowned in so much unnecessary stuff. And I think part of why it is not problematic, but like why it doesn't really engage me as the reader is not that we get a lot of details about the culture. I don't mind detailed descriptions in general. It's the way this is all handled, right? We just have this whole like slightly none of that society, like none of those cultures make any sense, and it always comes across as like slightly demeaning, slightly derogatory. It's like, yeah, well, everything's always dirty and everyone is always cheating. We have those like ways that Robert Jordan describes bodies. It happens again later on in other parts, like how like one woman, like the cook in like the inn, is described as someone who's so round that like it seems like a lot of balls stuffed into her, into like skin, I think is the description. Like, dude, that's a very, very fucked up way to describe a human body, and we have that a lot. It's like faces, the potato face, and then we have the guy who's like, they have demanding eyes, or rosebud mouths, or demanding mouths, or greedy mouths, and I'm like, who uses the word greedy mouth outside of cheap porn fanfic? Well, apparently Robert Jordan, but you know what I mean? He manages to make every single physical description of human beings sound shitty. And by shitty, I mean morally shitty, socially shitty, not badly written. Just it, and that's something that makes following these like stories, like you go down these cities, and you can tell he doesn't like Abu Dar. It's not a proper Andorian city, I assume. So, but it's like everything is dirty. There's always beggars. Most of them probably just try to appear wounded or whatever, but everyone's grimy, greasy. The place sucks. Everything is always, yeah. It comes across as extremely arrogant and culturally superior, with that feeling of cultural superiority, which doesn't exist. Just to make sure, like, cultural superiority is, yeah, it's chauvinism, basically. And it comes across like that all the time. So you read an entire bit of, like, I mean, that entire chapter reads, and now you could probably, and we'll go into that in a second, reads like, one vicious attack on Ibudari culture. Everyone is just, yeah. And now you could probably argue, that doesn't make any sense, because we never actually get like any indication that that's the case. You could argue that that's because, Matt Coffin is a terrible chauvinist. And I doubt that's the case, because it shows up no matter which character. Everyone is always looking down on these places, except, of course, Andor, which is wonderful, and stuff like that. But yeah, and that makes it like grating to read, because it's like, why do you hate all these places? Because and it goes like the same with clothing, right? When he describes like how Ebudari are wearing all their all the women have their cleavage out, like displayed, and like every single female character that is not necessarily important, I guess, will always be described as showing way too much of their body and having clinging silks. It feels gratuitous while being judgmental at the same time. It's like, I'll tell you their boobs are basically hanging out, but I'll also make sure you understand that is because they're morally vile creatures and are not proper Andor women who should, wear tight-laced shirts, not tight-laced, but you know what I mean, laced all the way up to their collar, no cleavage and whatever. And that's what makes this whole thing so annoying to read. You get a description that it's unrealistic, feels like moral preaching, and goes on forever and ever. That's one bit that I feel is, and this happens a lot in these books, again and again, no matter whether it's Matt or Elaine or Nynaeve or I guess Rand, although Rand doesn't get a lot of like actual description of anything because he's Rand, and we'll talk about that in a bit as well. Yeah. So yeah, there we go. Now we come to, well, all right. Do you remember when I said yesterday that apparently there's either like queens or sluts? Turns out that sometimes it's the same person, because we have that description of Matt walking into the palace trying to, find Nynaeve and Elaine, and we get like that whole scene that feels dumb as fuck, like him being like led around in circles in the palace and whatnot, and then he gets, into almost a fight with Aes Sedai, which is... as always, because when Aes Sedai talk, they obviously don't behave like highly intelligent women, which they're supposed to be, but we've gotten used to the fact that that's, yeah. Anyway, what happens is he meets the queen of Ebudar, Tylan, I think is her name, whatever, and she obviously comes on fairly strong on our good boy Matt there in a lot of ways. And it's, I don't know. It's weird. Like the way Robert Jordan makes like any form of like morality that is not high uptight sex, Protestant, like prudishness. He makes anything that is not that come across as morally derelict and disgusting. And that's a fairly fucked up way to describe a world of multiple cultures. We also need to talk again about the whole dice in his brain kind of thing, right? And this is what I mean when we talk about shitty writing techniques today. Because what we have there is a bunch of them in this book specific, in these chapters specifically. One of them is certainly that, once again, whenever Robert Jordan doesn't know how to actually make things work in any, logical sense or whatever, he just pulls the whole Taviran thing out of his arse and is like, suddenly Matt feels these weird things, and then all these things happen. I can't fully call him Deus Ex Machina, but that's basically what it is. Quite literally, if you want to think of the whole, weave of the pattern being woven by a loom, I guess, which is a machine. But, I'm like, it feels lazy. It's like, I don't know how to actually get on with this right now, so I'll do this. So that's one of those things. Like, yeah, whatever. Apparently, something will happen. Matt will end up in the palace and will probably, maybe fuck the queen. I assume so, although I assume the words will be cuddling, or they will just, not be mentioned. But yeah, that. So we have this long-ass thing going that seems to be only there to make sure that Matt ends up in the palace. But before that, we obviously also get, a situation where Nynaeve and Elaine need to apologize to him, because they're in for a bit of humiliating, because they haven't gotten a lot of it recently, right? So yeah, there's that part, which, as I said, could have been summed up in 2 pages, 3 pages if you use a different writing style and maybe drop all the pontificating. But yeah, we don't get that from Bobby J, do we? So yeah, there's that. Then let's look at the next thing there, and I'll go geographically. I'll jump back to the happenings around Rand after I'm done with Abu Dhar, right? So what also happens is that Nynaeve and Elaine are still unsuccessful when it comes to finding that damn ter'angreal. They apparently made a deal with the sea folk last time round when they were out there, but Bobby J doesn't tell us what. It's apparently a very, very dear deal. They agreed to stuff they didn't want to agree to, and so forth, but we don't know what. We just know it's dear, and he just dangles that in front of us. And that's what I would call the next sort of cheap writing trick. Don't get me wrong, all of those are absolutely legit, and you can do that stuff. I'm fine with it in theory. I just feel it's like having these. It just feels cheap. It's like, yeah, so they do something there, and then I'll not tell you. I'll just write out hints that it's absolutely too much, or what it's a very dear price, a high price they paid for help or whatever, but I'll just keep it away from you to keep up your suspense. It's like, you're not keeping up my suspense. You're being a cheap asshole who's trying to play at using cliffhangers, or not even cliffhangers. I mean, you know what I mean. And he does that a lot in this book for some reason. You know what? Why not? You're telling everything. You're showing not a lot, but you're telling everything in absolute fucking detail. But you're leaving this thing out on purpose, on absolute purpose. And it feels intrusive, I think. I think that's the main thing. Because compared to, say, earlier books, we basically get a scene by scene narration of what is going on. We don't have large jumps in time or anything in these chapters. So when he when Robert Jordan deliberately leaves out something and just hints at that there is something. It feels like a deliberate action of the writer. So the writer, Robert Jordan, kind of intrudes, I guess. AP Canavan would have like wonderful like vocabulary for that. I don't. But what I mean is, it feels like suddenly I'm reading Robert Jordan. I'm not in the story anymore. It breaks immersion in a way that using, I don't know, dumb words or whatever people complain about usually would never do for me. But it feels suddenly like the writer, Robert Jordan, is keeping something away from me to just pull it out later on when he's either thought of what it actually is or he wants to pull a cheap surprise on me. That's how it feels. And that's I think is a problem because, as I said, it breaks immersion in a way because suddenly it feels like I'm talking to the writer and no longer to the story. Like I'm in a conversation with the writer. I'm being pushed around by the writer, not by anyone else. And that's something that I find not so much fun, so to speak. Well, there's also like the idea that architecture doesn't really work that well, apparently, in these books. Because we have this palace with like a huge front stair. It's described in absolute, horrific detail because we have to with these books now. And Matt is standing across the street and looking at this front, stairwell with like columns and stuff and front gate. Right? And then the guy who's sitting in there, who's Jacob Carradine, that's the guy. He looks out of the window and sees Matt. It's like, how is that architecturally possible? Well, maybe if he's like on a couple of stories higher, possibly. But it doesn't. It feels weird, like he never thought about like how that house is laid out. But just sounded weird. But then again, whatever. What we find out, however, is that like everyone is apparently looking for this store of ter'angreal, not just the Ball of Winds, but it's huge pile of magic stuff, which is obviously technology. We know that by this time. Moghedien sent the Black Aja there. We find out that they are still there torturing people. We know, what's his name? Yeah, Carradine is looking for these kind of things, apparently for Ishamael, I assume, or now for Samael. Everyone is looking for these things. No one knows where they are. We will probably find them in like 2 books or so, maybe. But then apart from that, we just like get a bit more like evil posturing between those people, and that's about it. There's also people randomly attacking Matt now. We don't exactly know why, but, I'll leave it be for now. I'm sure it will be explained in excruciating detail later on. So no big complaints from me on that one so far. What else was there that I found annoying? All right, let's talk about the humiliation part, because that's, obviously one thing that we have to see again and again and again. I spoke about it before. It's like all about this domination bullshit thing. But anyway, we already know that Nynaeve and Elaine are behaving towards Matt like shit for a while. It's never fully explained why, but there we are. They believe, obviously, that, men need guiding, bullying, and whatnot. But at some point, Brigida, who is sort of like the most reasonable character at the moment, I feel, is, gets drunk with Matt and finds out about all of these things and goes back to them and tells them all about it. One thing that I found fun is actually the way Elaine gets drunk when Brigida gets drunk through the bond with the water. That was like, a fun scene. But, once again, I'll try to point out things that I like when I find them. That was just like, that was nice foreshadowing when it's like, why does Elaine get drunk or behave so out of character, which she does? It's like, why does she do that? And the next scene, Brigida comes in like is drunk, What else? Yeah, and she tells him, go, you guys should actually go to Matt and, apologize, or at least thank him for coming after you in the Stone of Tear. Funny aside, do you remember how I complained about the end of Dragon Reborn and how it didn't make any sense? Bobby J rubs it in again. It's like, yeah, Nynaeve and Elaine think that they were there as, bait for the trap for Rand. And in the entire fucking Dragon Reborn, Rand only finds out that they were there after the fucking battle. And apparently Bobby J still believes that that whole thing made sense, and it didn't. Gods, man, get at least your plotting right if you can't do anything else. But apparently we can't. So there we are. Anyway, they are forced to apologize to Matt. And there's like 2 or 3 things about that I want to point out, because it's once again very much like a sexist, misogynist kind of thing. Point 1. Neither Elaine nor Nynaeve actually understand why they're apologizing. Nynaeve is like, I will not apologize. What they do at the end of the day is apologize to Matt because they need Matt's help, and he said, like, I'll do it if you do these kind of things. And in Elaine's case, because Avienda tried to explain why she should actually, apologize and thank Matt. But there's like no real understanding. And that's sort of the problem. Because at the end of the day, what these characters are about, in a lot of way, is they are examples of how Robert Jordan views women. Because those characters are examples, but all women behave like that in these books so far. It's like, they know better. They don't, even if they apologize, they don't actually understand why they should apologize. But at the same time, they still need to go to men to fix their problem. Without ever understanding. It's like, even if men come to save them, they're like, no, we could have done this on our own. Which, they couldn't, because that's the world we're talking about here, the Wheel of Time, where women always need to be saved by men. But they don't understand that. And even if they're forced to apologize, they only do it to get something new out of it. So never trust a woman when they apologize to you, because they don't mean it really. All they really want is to get you to do something more for them. Which is, when you come to think about it, a fairly fucked up viewpoint. It's certainly one that we find in some very, very unsavory parts of the internet, the more like male-dominated internet, about people that maybe can't get laid and are a bit salty about it. And it just gets perpetuated through these stories here. It's like, why? Why? All right, so there we are with that bit. They go and apologize to Matt because they're forced to. Matt has still like a headache. All right, here's one thing that I want to point out. I know it's a fun, stereotype sort of, or trope, people that have a hangover are pissed off by people like speaking loudly. I know it's been used in fucking comedy since forever. And as someone who has had a hangover or 3 in their lives, that has never been a problem. It's like, that's so unrealistic. And I'm wondering, it's like, please answer in the comments. Those of you who have ever had like an actual hangover. I know you get a headache. I've had bad headaches because of it. There's all kinds of other aspects of a hangover. But in those cases, has like someone speaking loudly to you ever actually made things worse? I mean, I'm not talking about like actually, yelling super loudly, because, of course, extremely loud noises, yes, but that sensitivity to someone speaking in a normal speaking voice, has that ever been a thing? Because I'm beginning to wonder if that trope has like existed so long that we kind of take it for a given, even though it has like nothing to do with reality. So please tell me about your hangover experiences in the comments. I'm doing some, it's science basically, right? We're gathering empirical data here. Apart from that, however, Matt decides to, I'll go over there and go in the palace, which is sort of what I said, like how the whole thing is like just built so Matt can get to fuck a queen. But apparently that's what will happen soon-ish. And then they get found out by the Innkeeper, who doesn't believe their Aes Sedai, and drags them along to this other place where this circle, or whatever you want to call them, hangs out, which is all kinds of women that know how to channel but are not actually Aes Sedai. And no one believes them that they are Aes Sedai. They make more of a fool out of themselves, especially Nynaeve, because she can't ever accept male help, needs to get more humiliated, because, that's how that works. And they leave. There's another thing that I find interesting, and it's something that happens, which will be sort of like how I want to switch to the other side, to the Rand chapter, which is also goes in the same direction, is once more like how things are unrealistic. And that is, they are super powerful, right? They're Aes Sedai. They're pissed off already, so even Nynaeve can channel. Even though that whole idea kind of becomes a bit becomes more and more unrealistic at this point, annoying at this point. But, maybe it'll get fixed at some point. However, where was I? Right, so the Innkeeper, just yells at them for a while and tells them, you're not actual Aes Sedai and whatnot, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And they go with it, right? Nynaeve even, wraps her up in flows of air, uses the power to just, uses the power to basically tie her up and everything. And we know that both Nynaeve and Egwene have used the power before to also gag people, but she doesn't do it. No, she lets that woman rant at her much more. She doesn't even spank her for once. And I'm like, why is that? And obviously the case is we need to get to that scene of humiliation for Nynaeve and Egwene. But it's at this point we have that situation where apparently if you just yell enough at these magic people, they'll just listen to you and let you bully them around. It just doesn't really work because it feels like once again we're just basically ignoring the world and how characters sort of behave in these books because I need to go somewhere. But there we are. Then let's talk about the humiliation thing in the house with the circle or whatever you want to call them. There's a few interesting aspects to that. So the first one is obviously that Nynaeve still thinks that she can do things on her own and doesn't need Matt Coffin, because if Matt would help her, that would be an absolute disgrace. We all know he will have to do that in the end because that's how these books work. But she has to probably get burned a bit more to understand it because she's a strong, independent woman. Still needs, dominance afterwards. We'll find out. So yeah, there we are. Then we come to that house. She gets wrapped in, shielded from Sidar for a while. They just talk to them for a while. It's we don't believe you. You don't look like proper Aes Sedai. We will never believe you, because it's also about appearance apparently, and how you look and whatnot. There's a deeper point there. It kind of gets clearer when you look at the these women. What's her name? Rihanna, something Corley, and those other two women that they talk to in that house, and they're basically worshipping Aes Sedai. Aes Sedai are almost omnipotent. They know everything. They do all these wonderful things, and they can't ever be wrong. So these two cannot be Aes Sedai because they behave shittily. And why is that a problem? Because what it boils down to is, and it kind of comes back to that whole criticism of structure, of organization in a way that I spoke about before. And that is, apparently, the Aes Sedai only work and have this power because people believe in the power of the structure. Which is once again that weird conservative kind of think of how the deep state and how all these things work. It's if you don't believe them, if you don't give them the power and so forth, then they're basically worthless. And they are basically worthless because this is the dark side of it, right? Of course, structures work because we agree to let them work. That's why we have social contracts and all of that crap. You can always just ignore those kind of things. and just go and attack Ukraine and just don't give a fuck about these kind of things. You can do that. And ideally, if you have something of a society, of a community, of whatever, then the rest of the world will do something about it, even though it takes forever. But my point is, it is absolutely normal and okay to agree on certain conditions, to agree to these, to hold to laws, to even to sort of unwritten laws and stuff, and that's fine. What we get here with the Aes Sedai and some other stuff there is that we try to make, first of all, the structure that people agree to believe in, make that one ridiculous for all kinds of dumb reasons, make that one out as very inefficient and not doing the thing that it set out to do. And then we over exaggerate the fear that people have of that sort of paper tiger, if you want to call it that. That it's that fiction of order and structure. We have both aspects. And that's how you break that whole thing down, and once again come to the whole idea of all you need is bullies, strong men, strong women, but probably most likely only strongmen who actually get things done, because the structure is A, not working the way it's supposed to work, and B, people almost have a religious belief in the structure, which is inefficient. So only the Führer can save us, which he can't. Well, none of them can, but you know what I mean. And that's sort of what I took out of that, which annoys me once again to no end, because let's go into that in a minute some more, but let's look at one other thing first, and that is that even in those situations, Nynaeve is still always thinking about dresses for Lan, and colors for Lan, and dresses, and more dresses, and more dresses. It's like, what fucking low opinion does Robert Jordan, the writer, have of women and their interest? When every single fucking time a woman has a stream of consciousness, sooner or later, a couple of sentences in, they will start thinking about how they look in dresses for a man. What fucked up way of looking at it is that? I mean, come on. Once again, I'm sure, obviously I'm not a woman. But maybe some of you can tell me, do you always think about clothes all the fucking time? Even in situations where you're under a lot of stress, under a lot of external threats, even threats for your life, the world is about to end. Would you still think about what kind of color you would look good in for that one dude that's not even there? Because I think that's absolutely demeaning, and if I would read that about me, basically, as, my gender, I would be fucking furious. Speaking of which, Min is wearing boots, which she doesn't want to do. But she does it because Rand smiled at her when she wore boots once. Yeah, she gets tamed by a man, because all of them get, sooner or later. It just fucking annoys me at this point. So, not a big deal I wanted to talk about here. I wanted to focus on other things. So basically what happens is Rand sits around, talks to Aiel chiefs, humiliates Aes Sedai, and then out of nowhere this uber Aes Sedai shows up, behaves like an absolute dickhead, and gets away with it. And that's it. And I'm like, why the fuck? So, what's her name? Catswain? Something like that. So basically, Rand is trying to show to the Aiel that he's not a puppet of the Aes Sedai, which he does by having them serve him, be actual literal servants in the castle, which may be a bit heavy-handed, but at least the idea of I have to prove that I'm, actually, in charge here. That part makes sense. I can live with that. That's fine. It's a bit, heavy-handed to do it that way, but whatever. Here we go. Then, what's her name? That Aes Sedai that we've never, ever heard about before. And this is bad writing, right? She's apparently, legendary. She's been around for at least 300 years or something, right? She just walks in and bullies everyone and walks out and she gets away with it. Like, why does she get away with this? Why? It's the same thing as that scene over in what's it in Abu Dhar with Nynaeve and Elaine. We have people that are really powerful. Rand, who has just like made all these Aes Sedai kneel to him. And then another one walks in and just yells at him for a while. And he's just like, okay, I can't do this right now. Like, of course you could, motherfucker. The only reason you're not doing this is because Bobby J needs that character for something later, which I assume will be another humiliation, but we will see. So yeah, and that's the one thing that I find annoying about it. The other bit is obviously the fact that yeah, she's supposed to be this legendary green Aja, and it would have really helped if that would maybe have like been mentioned before somewhere. It's like, yeah, we have these discussions of which Aja is which, and we drop all these fucking names, and then it's like, it would have been so easy, like a book before, 2 books before, if someone's like, the greatest one of our order was Catswain. Pretty sure she has like a second name because everyone has one that doesn't make any sense. It would have been so easy to drop some hint, and then everyone is like, whoa, where did you come from? No, he just like drops her in out of nowhere, gives her all these powers we have to take on faith. And I don't have any faith in you, Bobby J. At this point, I'm pretty faithless. Anyway, she just bullies everyone around, and we'll see where all of this is going. What I want to talk about here is, once again, the atrocious way mental health is dealt with in these books. So there is the fiction, I mean, part of the world building is that men who use the power will go mad, whatever that means. And that in itself is already like a weird and kind of, tough way to deal with mental health. But then again, this is written in the early 90s, or like the world was built in like the late 80s, and the general discourse on mental health wasn't very far along at that point, so I can live with that. But we've gotten to the point where this is like the mid 90s, and the only way mental health, or like that deterioration of mental health, of sanity, so to speak, in men will, actually become apparent is, for whatever reason, that they laugh madly and cackle evilly, or hear voices. And yeah, well, I don't like that. I mean, it's just not a good look if you're like, you know what? He's hearing voices. He must be going insane. Doesn't make any sense. Because what he does at the end of the day is it perpetuates that stereotype, that stigma, so to speak, of, well, I guess it goes into like the more schizophrenic part of mental health. I'm not an expert, but that stereotype is very much stigmatizing people who suffer of mental health. Because it reinforces that like weird idea or stereotype or trope of, yeah, people that hear voices in their head must be mad. There's no such thing as mad or madness. It might be an interesting aspect to look at, like the trope of madness or insanity, or whatever you want to call it, in literature, in fantasy literature in specific. Might be worthwhile doing. I don't feel I'm like a really good expert. I would probably have to do some reading up on it. But, but it just feels cheap. It's like, especially in a world where apparently there are, reincarnation is a thing. Stuff like that happens again and again, right? And you're like, I don't know, maybe don't call it madness. Maybe don't do that, because it really hurts people that suffer from mental health if you use these like cheapest version of it, like the comic book like insanity trope, right? And we're using that in like this sort of, in this way, especially with the character of Rand, who is one of our viewpoint characters, and he hears these voices, and we're like, is that all you can do? If there is that real threat of, like losing sanity, is that how you should do that? I don't think that's how you should do it. All right, so there's that. Then there's like a couple of like small points that I just want to point out quickly. Number one, religion. it doesn't exist because Robert Jordan isn't touching it for a lot of reasons, although it's always there in the background and we'll need to figure out how and whatnot. And then, all of a sudden, one of the Dark Friends, or is it? Yeah, I think it's a Dark Friend. Or maybe one of the Black Gods. I keep forgetting who is like, and she would have prayed to the Creator if she could still remember how to. So all of a sudden you fucking pray to that fucking Creator? How did that happen? Where did that come from? Come on, I mean, there's no religion, there's no like that kind of stuff, and suddenly, all of a sudden, you pray to that guy again? Well, it's inconsistent, it is. And I have a suspicion of why that is the case, but I'm not sure. I want to read more to find out more so I can go into that further. The other part is, once again, Aiel. Remember when I spoke about like the noble savage thing? It kind of happens again, and I think there's like what I think is the big problem there, apart from like going with these like weird like really shitty like this is how us Westerners imagine mostly like Native Americans would speak kind of thing going, which we have in that scene with the evil Aiel, the Shido with Savannah, sort of there, but it goes beyond that, because the point is, Wheel of Time does have basically two languages. There is whatever people are speaking now, and then there is the old language. Well, I'm not talking about whether that makes sense in world-building terms or not. That's not what I want to do here. What I want to look at here is the fact that if everyone speaks the same language, and you go for like, certain ideas of dialect, like, the Ilioner thing that sounds like cheap pirates, or the like sort of like drawl of the Seanchan, that even though Seanchan on the different continents speak the same language, that's like drawl it more like apparently in a more southern Texas style, southern drawl basically. Why is it that the only ones that really talk in this crude, over-the-top, weird way, why is it that the only ones that do that are the Aiel? I mean, even the continuous like fishing metaphors of the Tyrian come across as fairly normal compared to that, and that's what I want to look at here, because what it boils down to is that apparently, since we switch viewpoint characters and they're all talking in the same language, even if they're talking amongst each other, like with Savannah and the other old, like wise ones, I want to call them old ones for one second, Savannah and the Shido, right? Even they still, and that what that does, it establishes that white Angdoran Protestant way as like the actual cultural standard. It's like that's the proper way to speak, and I go out of my way to put in those odd, weird phrasings that, once again, sound really condescending. And I put them in even if they talk amongst each other. And the problem there is, while, if we talk with someone in a language that is not our, our own language, or they talk to us in our language, but that's not like their home, like their mother tongue, so to speak, right? Sometimes they're, archaic phrasings creep in, or sometimes we try to, translate sayings from our world, from our language into another one, and that can lead to these like weird misunderstandings. And that's fine if you have people from different backgrounds talking to each other. But if they're talking amongst themselves, and you still use those weird, odd, arcane phrasings that, once again, in the case of the Aiel, sound extremely really shitty 19th century German Karl May, like Western author talking about Native Americans. That's how it sounds. And if that's how you imagine those people will talk amongst themselves, that's fucking racist, that is. Because, come on, at the end of the day, our conversations are always the same if we are talking in our home, our first language, right? We're rude. They don't stick out, those things, because they're part of our language. So putting in those phrases again builds a hierarchy of cultures within the Wheel of Time, reinforces them through language in this world where everyone is supposed to speak the same language. And that's where I see the problem, because it showcases it shows the idea that for our writer Robert Jordan there are clear hierarchies of cultures, and yeah, that's chauvinist at least, if not racist, and that sucks. So yeah, that's something fun that we find in here, isn't it? Apart from that, what else? Yeah, well, I mean, the whole like Catswain kind of thing is once again the idea that it is all about power and who gets to be boss hog and top lobster, apparently. It's all about that, and it's never really about anything else. So, well, whatever. I don't know what else to say about it. I start to dislike this book as well. It's not as bad yet. It's not as bad as, Lord of Chaos yet. But, but on the other hand, I'm like 2/3 through this mess, so, pretty good, I would say. I'll talk to you tomorrow about the next bit, and we'll see how all this ends. And until then, cheers.